This is Greg Richling, and you are listening to Jim on Bass.
Welcome back to another episode of the Jim on Bass Show. For today's very special guest, we have on a bassist from one of my favorite bands, the Wallflowers. He spent 20 years with them. He's also a producer of the documentary film, The Immediate Family. Please welcome the great Greg Richling. Greg, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to have you. And I know you've been quite the busy guy lately, right? You've been attending film festivals and promoting The Immediate Family, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for those that don't know, The Immediate Family is the follow-up to Denny Tedesco's award-winning film, The Wrecking Crew, which chronicled the 60s session players in LA that played with everyone, Frank Sinatra, The Association, the Mamas and the Papas, and on and on. So this follow-up chronicles a group of musicians that were really famous kind of coming up in the singer-songwriter era of the 70s. Russ Kunkel, Lee Sklar, Danny Korchmar, and Waddy Wachtel. So, it's about their relationship, knowing each other since the early 70s, and, goes through all the different records that they worked on together and kind of comes full circle. They've wound up in a band together, as you said, called The Immediate Family in their 70s, playing a lot of the songs that they wrote or produced for other artists, including originals that they've wrote. So it's a really cool story and a real honor to kind of get to tell the life story of all of these great players that I, for one, came up listening to and really, enjoying. So it's been a treat.
Yeah, it's I can't wait to see the movie, and you've been going around showing it in different places, and you grew up in LA, right? So
That's right. Local native, born in Santa Monica, raised in West LA, and still living in that area. So
yeah, it must be pretty surreal too, because I know you had a screening of this movie at the Chinese Theater, right? So that must have been
that's
pretty
right.
cool.
Yeah, that was a real highlight, to be able to show it in our hometown, and especially at a theater like that has so much history.
Hmm.
It sold out in about 4 hours, and
Wow.
we had a great screening and Q&A after. Yeah, it was really something.
Yeah, well, did you kind of know these guys already that make up the Immediate Family, or did you just maybe admire them as a fan, or?
The only one that I knew was Danny Korchmar.
Mm.
Interestingly, before the Wallflowers had made Bringing Down the Horse, the second album that had like One Headlight and Sixth Avenue Heartache and all of that, Danny actually was one of the producers that we had in mind to maybe produce the album. And
Wow.
so we went into the studio and we cut a couple of tracks with him. It didn't end up working out, but it's just so funny that 25, 30 years later, I'm producing his life story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And I guess he's the right guy to have producing you then too. He knows a
Yeah,
few hits.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't, back then we settled on T-Bone. Jacob had some family history with him, and it just made more sense at the time to go with T-Bone. But Danny's had an amazing career as a producer, obviously all the Don Henley records,
Mm.
and working with Jackson Browne and James Taylor. And he certainly didn't need us to make it happen.
Well, you mentioned some names there, and I'm just kind of cherry picking some of the big names, but that really jump out at me. But these guys are involved with artists like Stevie Nicks, Keith Richards, James Taylor, Phil
Right.
Collins, Neil Young. The list goes on and on. It's pretty amazing to. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure they have some good war stories for you.
Yeah, yeah, and some of them went in the film, and we were really lucky enough to have all of those people, interviewed for the film. So it was amazing. Nobody said no.
Mm.
They all wanted to kind of take part in the celebration of these players that had, made up the music of all of their material, through
Wow.
the years. So we had Carole King, James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, Jackson Browne, Don Henley, Neil Young, Keith, Lyle Lovett, Phil Collins, Steve Jordan. It was a real thrill for us to make a movie with all of those people. Yeah, it was an amazing experience,
Yeah.
and it's won 9 audience awards in the film festivals.
Man.
So it's really translating with audiences. Denny made a great movie. There's an authenticity to it.
Mm.
You really feel like you're inside their world and learning about, what it's like to be a session player and be on the
Mm.
road. That's what distinguished them from the Wrecking Crew. Was the Wrecking Crew mainly stayed in the studio and made records, and they didn't want to lose their seat,
Mm.
the recording studios. and then they would hire a road band to go out and do the tour, the records that they played on. What was different about these guys in the 70s was that they were making the albums and they were going out and supporting the records that they recorded. So that was sort of what a differentiator, of those two eras.
It's crazy because there's no like now you have technology you can do on your laptop, but back then obviously more
Right.
goes behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, both scenes were sort of based in ensemble recording, like in the studio. I think that's something a lot of people miss these days is because of the home recording
Yeah.
and, budgets drying up. People have a tendency to, do a lot of stuff solo at home and send files around, and
Hmm.
will complain about, not sort of having as much of a chance to be in a room with other players, kind of playing, takes and reacting in real time. And these guys grew up, doing that. And, so it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how did you get involved as a producer? Because you have another producer, right? Jack Pyatt.
Jack and Jonathan Sheldon is the other producer who's actually a partner at our production company, Pfonetic, that we just kind of announced in Variety that
Yeah.
launched. I've known John for about 35 years. We had the same music teacher growing up, so we've always been sort of in three of each other's lives. And, basically what happened is after 20 years of being in the Wallflowers, around 2013, after we'd done a bunch of touring for the sixth album, Glad All Over, I had just kind of come to the end of the road on touring life. My son at the time was 8 years old, and the way the business had changed, I had to be on the road 8 months a year if I wanted to make a living being in a band. And I always kind of white knuckled the touring, in truth. I loved recording and I loved, being in the band, but I wasn't as much a fan of being gone on the road. I loved the shows, but all that time that you have to kind of dedicate to being out there, I just had other things that I wanted to do with that time. People would say to me, don't you do stuff when you're out there? And I'm like, yes, I'm filling my time and I'm finding things to do, but I'm not doing exactly what I want to be doing with all that time. If I could have magically been transported to the shows at night, I think I'd probably, opinion of it. But dedicating my entire day, day after day, week after week, month after month, to just kind of, waiting to play a show at night. After 20 years, I kind of had enough of that. And so I left the band in 2013. I did a few things in between, and then eventually started this production company with my old friend. And for the first time in my life, combined music and film together by doing a lot of music docs and things like that, because I'd grown up in LA with a mother who was in television. So I always had this dual interest in film and music. Worked on a lot of shows as a PA growing up. I ended up going to film school. And then after I graduated film school, I started working at TriStar Television. And that was when I got the call to be in the Wallflowers. And I thought, well, this is probably the one opportunity I'm going to have to like to be in a touring band on a major label. And so I left that job, and the rest is, did 20 years with the band before coming back to film. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're living a double life,
Yeah, that I've finally merged together.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun being able to kind of merge the two now. I still play for fun, but my time is spent, producing these movies, which takes a lot of time. So,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because I imagine, the immediate family, as you know, the guys in the band, they were credited for the successes of people like Jackson Browne, James Taylor, Carole King, like you said. But some of those artists didn't really consider themselves solo artists, right? They always gave credit. And do you kind of relate to maybe them as well, being a bass player? Like I play the drums. I'm used to not getting the spotlight sometimes as much as the lead singer. So is there kind of a bond you shared while you were making this movie in a way?
well, I think what kind of differentiates this production company that we started, Phonetic, is
Mm-hmm.
that my partner and I come from music backgrounds, right? Like he was signed to MCA and had a band called Naked in the mid 90s, and he put an album out. And then, of course, all my years with the Wallflowers, I think it lends a different perspective to the work that we're doing now in film with musicians, because they know they're speaking to film producers who have done what they're doing, right? So
Yeah.
there's a different kind of
Trust.
trust and bond there, that they know that we don't have to imagine what it was like for them. They know that we've been on the road, we've made records, we've toured, we've done all of that. And I think that kind of shorthand has been helpful, in putting these films together.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also just giving the subjects the confidence that, the people that are behind the movie have a different level of understanding in regards to what they do for a living. And there's even just their schedules. We've had to work around tours. Some of the guys couldn't do Q&As because they were out on the road with Lyle Lovett, Russ Lee, or the rhythm section for the big band. And Lyle Lovett's been touring, so those guys were taking part in a lot of Q&As, at the film festivals. They've had to kind of take a break from that. Some of the other guys have picked up the slack, but yeah, I think that's the main thing, is just that the fact that we're behind these films and we've done, to a certain degree what they're doing.
And to
Yeah.
give people, I mean, we already named some big names, but to give some, maybe some insight on some songs that they've directly been a part of. Again, I cherry picked from a huge list, but some of my favorites were Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon, Lovely Day, Bill Withers, a couple other ones, Running on Empty, Jackson Browne, and Edge of 17 from Stevie Nicks. So most likely you're a fan of some of these songs, and this movie would probably capture just about anyone's interest. So pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, we tried to make a movie that appealed to the housewife in Iowa, the lawyer in Missouri. We knew that we couldn't make a record that was, well, to use a, inside baseball.
Yeah.
We knew that we had to make a movie that appealed to the general public, and kind of Yellow Brick Road the story for them, so that they understood how these guys came together. You can't make a movie where it's like, well, Jackson Browne understands it because he's a part of it, but you had to kind of broaden it. And so in doing that, what really I think worked effectively in the film, it's been, all the recounting of recording these hit songs. And what happens is the audience is going, oh my God, I can't believe he worked on that song. Oh my God, that one becomes this sort of volcano of hits, between the four of these guys. So yeah, Waddy's recounting what went on in the studio making Werewolves of London with Jackson and Warren Zevon, and there's a funny story there about doing many, many, many takes and going back to the second one. I don't want to give anything away about the film, but and then Danny talks about making the Henley records, and you've got Lee talking about Phil Collins. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know, like Russ played drums on Lovely Day by Bill Withers, and Waddy produced The Church, Under the Milky Way, that record, Starfish, which kind of crossed over into the new wave and was a big hit in the 90s. We reveal things like, Russ produced 6 albums for Jimmy Buffett. These guys have just done so much, that you kind of have to find the big hits and kind of condense things, because any one of these guys could have a documentary on their albums,
Yeah.
So yeah, but certainly I think people are going to respond to the stories about the songs, and yeah, it's very cool.
Well, when is the release date? I know you're kind of still a little tinkering with some of it, right?
We are in the process of delivering the film to Magnolia, who it looks like they're going to put the film out theatrically in December.
Nice.
I'm guessing that it'll hit a streamer probably 4 or 5 months after that. I'm not sure which one yet, but it's whoever Magnolia will have their output deal with at the time. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, when it does come out, we'll put some stuff out and put some hashtags behind it, so get the word out.
Appreciate that.
And you did mention how your mom was into the film industry, and I thought an interesting tidbit about you, especially for recently, one of your first real TV jobs, right, was with Paul Rubens and Pee Wee Herman.
That's right. I was a PA on Pee Wee's Playhouse when I was 19 years old, and then he had moved on from his set assistant during filming and asked if I wanted to do that job. And so it was incredible. I was his personal assistant on the set of the Playhouse, and
Wow.
as you can imagine, I was in film school. I came home for the summer. He was an amazing guy. He really was. He was a great boss and just a super caring guy. He'd have these terminally ill kids come from, like, I don't know what, Make a Wish or certain foundations, and they would come to visit the set, because it was like, their I hate to say it, it was their last wish kind of,
Mm.
to go meet him and see, the Playhouse set. And he would shut everything down for like a couple hours, which, what that entails. I mean, that's a big deal to shut down a
Yeah.
huge studio. And he would, have the child in his arms, and he would walk them around all, the set, and they'd be staring at him and touching his face, because a lot of these kids, they were like babies. And then after the tour, he would come over to me and just say, I need to go in the trailer and
Mm.
for a while. I don't want any calls. I don't want anybody to bother me. And it took its toll emotionally on him, because he knew that these children, were terminal, and you learn a lot about somebody in those moments. But what a creative, yes, we would hang outside of the film, outside of filming as well.
Yeah,
Great.
how much different was he from the Pee Wee role? Because even in interviews, they kind of seem really close together in a way. Like,
You mean from like the character and
yeah, does he stray off too far from it? He almost seems like he is Pee Wee Herman in a way.
it was sort of like an on and off switch. It was like totally normal guy, like, when I would be dealing with him off camera, just,
Yeah.
it was no kind of, he didn't have a problem getting out of character,
Oh, okay.
totally 180, you know, just a great guy. It was really sad to see him go. I
Yeah.
I didn't actually know that he was sick. I think he kept it quiet,
Yeah.
which is tough when you know somebody, and they're not feeling that, because it comes to obviously a shock, when he passed. He'd send me Christmas cards every year. My mother, he'd send Christmas cards too. He'd send me
Wow.
Christmas cards. He was really great. I don't know how he had the time for all of this.
Yeah. Well, rest in peace, Paul Rubin. Sounds like a great guy, and glad that you guys had a special relationship.
Yeah, yeah, we did. I cherish that time for sure. Yeah.
When you were growing up, it made me wonder too about was there music in the house? Any records that you remember at an early age?
Yeah, so it's funny, the only real musician in my family was like, I think it was like my mother's grandfather. He played violin and organ from Minnesota. And but my parents weren't musicians, but they loved music. My father especially. My earliest recollections have to do with driving around in his car, listening to all of those, 70s kind of hits. But there were certain records that stood out that were always in the car, right? He played them incessantly. Steely Dan Gaucho. There were a few Steve Winwood
Mm.
records, like I think it's Talking Back to the Night or something, or Arc of a Diver was another big one. By Minute, the Doobie Brothers,
Mm.
Toto 4,
Yeah.
those, Firefall and Dan Fogelberg, it's that whole kind of seven, Teddy Pendergrass. I kind of cut my teeth on all of that stuff in the 70s, which, you know, falls right in line with the immediate family stuff that we're talking about. The whole warm analog ensemble playing of that decade into the early 80s. That's kind of my thing.
Mm.
It's funny because I ended up in a band that kind of, played classic rock, kind of alternative rock, but the stuff that I really listened to growing up on my own, like I'm a big new waver, when I was coming up in my early teens. So I love a lot of those new wave bands, Echo and the Bunnymen, Depeche
Yeah.
Mode, Order. That really is more along the lines of my style of music. So, although I loved what we did in the band, it wasn't the kind of music that I would put on in my own spare time.
You're used to putting on the concert, but who was maybe your first concert growing up?
Well, you mentioned him earlier. My first concert was my father took me to Willie Nelson at the Greek.
Oh, wow.
First concert. Yeah.
Are you a big Willie guy?
I'm a fan. I'm not a, I don't, I can't say that I listen to him all the time, but I'm a fan,
Yeah,
Yeah.
did you ever get to meet him later on once you had made it in music?
No, I don't think I ever crossed
Hmm.
paths. We crossed paths with so many people through the
Yeah.
years. A lot of them we got to play with and tour with. We were fortunate. We opened up for Tom Petty multiple
Hmm.
times. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. We played with Springsteen. We opened for the Stones 2 nights at Dodger Stadium. We
Wow.
opened for 4 nights at Madison Square Garden in October of 2000. God, who else? We've Levon Helm sat in with us a bunch.
Wow.
Yeah. I think McCartney and Zeppelin are the only ones that we haven't
That's
met.
awesome. Well, I was going to ask you about that because you played with Bruce Springsteen at an award show, right? I remember you guys did one headlight together.
Right.
That must
Yeah.
have been pretty surreal because Bruce is one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was incredible. The story there is that we were on the road supporting Bringing Down the Horse. I think it was like 1997.
Hmm.
And in the middle of a tour, we got a call that Bruce wanted to have the band over to the house for lunch and hang out. And then he was going to drive us to sound check at Tradewinds in New Jersey and
Wow.
then sit in with us that night. And I remember just everybody being super excited, the whole time leading up to that day, And sure enough, one afternoon at about 2 o'clock, we all piled in the lobby of the hotel, and this dually pickup pulls up outside, and there's a guy with like a Stetson hat, and we were just sort of like, I think he's here. All shuffled out, and it was him, and we got in the car or in the dually pickup, and it was kind of surreal. I sat shotgun, all the guys were in the back seat, and he proceeded to kind of drive to his house and point out, different places that he'd like, where he'd grown up, and it was just amazing. We got to his home, and they had a big lunch there, and he gave us a tour of his barn and the horses and his recording studio. It's funny because in the middle of lunch we were sitting there, and all of a sudden Sting and his wife walk in and sit table. It's like, oh, hello. He
Yeah.
was down doing 5 nights, I think, at the Paramount, and he and Bruce had met during the Amnesty International tours in the 80s. So they'd become really good friends. So when Sting was playing, he was staying at Bruce's house instead of a hotel. So they all came to the show that night.
Wow.
We had Bruce and Levon and John Bon Jovi all got up, but for some reason we didn't ask Sting. He was standing there, but just the heat of the moment, we just, it didn't happen.
Too
Uh,
many legends, you forgot about him.
yeah, exactly. Maybe, he didn't rehearse with us, so there was that too. But
Yeah.
great night, we had a great show. The whole time the crowd was chanting Bruce, it sounded like booze.
Yeah.
5 songs with him, and it was an amazing day and night.
Yeah. Sounds amazing. And another guy, you mentioned him earlier, Tom Petty, when you're touring with them. I got to talk with Jakob Dylan after one of his shows recently, and he said how Tom Petty, it seems to be his favorite guy. And he plays cover songs each night of Tom Petty, and he said that they're cut from the same cloth. So just I imagine you probably had some good moments with the Heartbreakers.
Yeah. We toured with them extensively on that record Echo that they
Mm.
put, I think it was around 2001. We opened the first 2 shows when they did that Fillmore stint for 20 nights.
Oh yeah, that's epic.
That was amazing. And then we did a one-off with them right before I left the band in 2013. We did a
Mm.
one-off at Saratoga Performing Arts Center in like upstate New York. We definitely had our time with them. But one night we got to go sing background vocals on American Girl, right? I think it was the last show of the tour. That was a highlight. So I got to sit on the mic with Scott Thurston and,
Wow.
belt out some BVs. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, one of my favorite drummers too is Steve Ferroni.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know Steve. He's amazing, right? A great guy. I'd sit on the side of the stage and watch him play every night. That was like it was amazing because with songs like You Don't Know How It Feels, or not that, what was the one on Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, Don't Come Around Here No More.
Mm. Great drums on that.
That was on Southern Accents, I think. Yeah. he would, that was a lot of programmed drumming on the record, but he would play that like on a live kit,
Hmm.
and it was astonishing. He's just a his time is impeccable and his feel. But I mean, everybody that knows him knows he's like the pocket king. He's those days in the Average White Band and all of that stuff. It's a real education watching a guy like that.
Yeah. And speaking of great bass players, there's a couple photos of you out there with Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick, and they were the first band that I got to see that my dad took me to. So
Okay, yeah, amazing band. Of course, grew up listening to them, and he had that eight string bass. He
yeah.
would always had kind of a unique sound, and I had the good fortune of meeting him through our old guitar player Stuart Mathis.
Mhm.
They lived in suburb in Nashville, and one day I went over to Tom's house, and I actually bought a Mustang bass from him, and we hung out and went to one of their shows when they were on tour with Aerosmith, and got to go backstage and hold all of Rick Nielsen's wild guitars. There's so many moments, when you're in a band for that long and you kind of have access to that kind of echelon of people. It's leaves you with a lot of great memories, and a lot of gratitude.
Well, what drew you to the bass? And is that the only instrument you play, or?
I play a little bit of drums and guitar, but bass is the main one. I started off on classical guitar and I got very frustrated quickly with that. And then I just, it's kind of funny again, going back to the new wave thing. You have to remember it's 1981. I'm 11 years old and I'm hearing Fascination by Human League on the radio, right? And it had that real kind of like knobby jazz bass sound. It was real throaty and mid-rangey, and that song in particular just kind of drew me to the instrument. And then I bought a Kramer Steinberger copy. Was the first the headless, neck, with the tuning pegs at the bottom.
Oh yeah.
Those basses, and I started taking lessons in Santa Monica. I think it was called Ace Music or something, right? I started off just sort of like wanting to learn all the hits of the day, and then got a little bit more serious after that. Started taking lessons from a studio musician in town and started getting more into writing my own stuff and programming drum machines. And I had a Tascam Porta One and a Lesis HR-16 drum machine. I had a guitar and a bass, and just he kind of got me interested in arrangements and stuff like that early on. So that's kind of how it started. Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't play a synthesizer or something like that, you know?
Every now and then I'll mess around with like a Korg, or I've had a little bit of that through the times. But Rami and I, Rami Jaffe, who was the time keyboard player in the Wallflowers, who's now been with the Foo Fighters forever,
Mhm.
I were really, really close, still are. But we were really close when we were in the band, and we would do a lot of stuff sort of outside of the Wallflowers. We composed incidental music for a Pearl Jam
Mhm.
DVD, a lot of incidental music for MTV, Cribs, CMT, a lot of little ditties that we wrote got used on those types
Oh
of shows.
yeah.
So we were always kind of, so I would go to his place and use a lot of his gear. He kind of amassed a lot. I'm a Virgo minimalist. I've never liked, sort of amassing gear. I've never really cared about gear very much. If I had a couple of bases that I felt comfortable on, that was kind of enough for me. Yeah.
Well, how did you meet Jakob Dylan then?
We went to high school together.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so it's funny because even before the Wallflowers existed, he used to do a lot of recording, just do a lot of instrumentals. He wasn't even singing back then.
Hmm.
He would go on family trips and, go record stuff with drum machines and guitars. And then he'd come back and maybe he'd, say, hey, come over to my house, throw a bass on this. I might have even played some drums here and there. So, that was sort of the first musical interaction that we had, was just working on some of these early song demos that he would create, you know.
Do you guys go to the high school reunions or?
I went to a couple. He there.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering when you're in high school, I know, the media and everything is always hounding the Bob Dylan questions. Did people really know who Jakob Dylan was? I imagine word probably got out. Like, was he shy or?
You mean back in high school?
Yeah.
My relationship with him at the time was just sort of confined to school, and then if we get together, outside of school on the weekend or something, get something to eat or work on a song.
Mm.
Um, I didn't, I mean, obviously people knew in school,
Mm.
but it was LA, there were also children of other famous people there. So it was,
Okay.
what I mean? It's sort
Yeah.
of, I hate to say it, but it's a little bit different here in that regard. It's not out of the ordinary to see a famous actor at a restaurant so nobody really made issue of it at school or anything.
Okay.
I think he had a real kind of extraordinary existence, well, from that side of things. It was pretty normal.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, of course, when we got out there in the band, a lot of critics and a lot of interviewers wanted to go there and talk about Bob, and he wasn't very interested at the time. You
Hmm.
know, New, and we were peddling our own thing.
Yeah.
Plus, Bob was always on the road. There wasn't really much to talk about.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, what was the creative process like for you guys? Like, did Jacob always kind of present something and then you guys worked music around it, or would you bring lyrics in? How did it kind of work as a band?
Yeah, so usually we would go into a rehearsal hall or somebody's home studio, and he would come in with lyrics, melody, progression, sort of a skeletal version of the song, and then we would all write our parts to that and
Mm.
create, the sound that you end up hearing on the record. Rami's keyboard parts, my bass parts, and that kind of thing, and that's kind of how it would go. The last album, we came back after a really long hiatus. We'd been on a break for about 7 years. We did a little bit of touring in between that, but mainly everybody broke off and did other things. I started producing more records. My son was born. When Jake called around somewhere around the middle of 2011, he said, I've made a couple quiet records for Columbia. They were wondering about an electric album. I thought maybe it's time to get the Wallflowers back and make a rock record. And so I was in the middle. I was just about to go to Colorado to produce a record, and I said, "Hey, I'll be back in 10 days. Let's talk about it." And I basically just said to him, I think if I were to come back to the band at this point, there's got to be some kind of growth for us. If we could write the music with you and you write your lyrics and melody, obviously that would be great. And he said, "Well, it's funny that you should say that. Rami said the same thing. And I don't really feel like presenting 15 songs to you guys." So he came up with this concept that was really exciting at the time. And it actually turned out to be to me, the easiest record that we ever made and the most fun in a lot of ways. Until Glad All Over, where we decided to experiment and do something different, which we actually went into the studio with no material and we
Mm.
jammed in the room all day, and we just created all of this music on the spot, and then he would go back and write lyrics for it. It was interesting because going in with no material, you would think, oh boy, what happened here, but we would just kind of jam and create stuff on the spot as a group, and it would get shaped over the course of an afternoon, and we'd have a song by the end of the day, and he'd walk around Nashville kind of typing his lyrics into a phone or something, and back and starting to work on it. So that's how we did
Wow, that's the inside scoop right there.
it. Exactly.
There's a little bit of a Clash influence too, right? In that album, Glad All Over.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Jacob had always said, that he loved the Clash, but the music never really seemed to reflect that. So for that record, we had a couple songs that were homages to the band, where we actually set out to do stuff that sounded like that.
Mm.
And then thought, well, maybe we'll see if Mick Jones wants to be a part of it, and so he played guitar and vocal on those two tracks,
Yeah.
Reboot the Mission and Misfits and Lovers. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting too that all these years later, you obviously are in the film industry producing the documentary, and then Jakob Dylan kind of went that route in a certain way. In Echo and the Cannon, he was kind of like the narrator, the host. So I thought it was kind of interesting that you both seem to be in to the history of music, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he started to work on that when I was leaving the band, but it was at first their idea was more just to do a duet album, you know. I think that it gradually became, why don't we do a documentary, you know? But yeah, there is a little bit of interesting crossover there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was curious, with a lot of people always ask about Jakob Dylan and his dad, Bob Dylan. I'm just wondering, since he is a big legend in music, did he ever pop up at shows or come to the recording studio, or was it kind of a very separate thing?
I think in the 20 years that I was in the band, I saw him a couple times because you have to remember he's on, quote, the never ending tour, right? He's
Yeah.
always gone. There were a few times that we crossed paths. One time we did a corporate for a company called Applied Materials, and we played the San Jose Arena and we opened for him.
Wow.
That was really cool. It was a Wallflowers and Bob Dylan show, in a huge place, and it was really great. The other memorable moment that I had was we did a show, or we did two shows at the Pantages opening for Chris Isaak in 1995. And I remember after one of the shows, I got off stage and I went on the bus and I was changing and getting out of my, stage clothes. And Jakob came on the bus and he said, "Hey, my dad wants to talk to you for a minute." Like, why? And so I was, obviously curious. So I went down and he was standing at the foot of the bus outside talking to our manager. And I was standing there for a minute and they were finishing talking. And he looks over at me and he puts his hand out and shakes my hand and he says, "I like what you're doing." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that." And, I was like, "Okay, well, I got to go now." I thought to myself at the time, that was a pretty cool compliment from the greatest songwriter of all time. So that was quite a moment.
Yeah, that's quite a moment indeed. That's pretty awesome. And I wanted to mention some shows that kind of caught my eye in terms of the history of the Wallflowers. I thought a really cool thing you did that I think is a little underrated when it comes to music venue history is you played a show. I think it was a double bill with Creed at Alcatraz, right, in San
Yeah,
Francisco. That must have been pretty neat.
that was unbelievable. Yeah, that was kind of a left field proposition. Go play outside at Alcatraz. I think we were the band to ever
Mm,
play on the grounds outside there. And I think they filmed us touring it and going
mm,
in cells and the mess house and where they ate and everything. That was a trip.
yeah.
I agree with you. The one thing that kind of stands out about that for me was that I actually thought like, wow, that the audio of that, the performance and the way that that turned out as like a live show, it's probably one of my favorite sounding TV shows we did. It just sonically, it was, more together than a lot of those shows can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison. Pretty soon we'll have a live album from the Wallflowers live at Alcatraz.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Live abandoned jail cells.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always nice when you can leave Alcatraz. You're not stuck there for 30 years.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's a trip when they do this thing where they give you a sense of what it's like, and they
Mm.
you want to sell and they lock it. You can imagine being in there for years.
Yeah.
Good
So you made the right choices in life.
God.
Well, a
Yeah.
couple fun shows I've been at. I was curious if you remembered them. It was called K-Fog Kaboom, and it was on like a big abandoned parking lot right next to the Bay Bridge. And then they shot off fireworks after. Now, I remember Fred Eltringham was the drummer. I was wondering if you remember that show at all. It was like 2005-ish, I think.
Okay. Man.
See, that's when you know you've had a good career when you can't remember shows.
Yeah, but I should remember because of the fireworks.
Yeah, and it's right next to the Bay Bridge. Like you look over and the Bay Bridge is right there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Showing my age.
Yeah, yeah. Or how about I wonder if you remember this show. I never really understood maybe what kind of went behind it. It was kind of I think sort of a surprise show, at least for me as a fan. You guys came to San Francisco. It was like 2012 or 13. I think it was 2013. You played at the Independent and you were opening, which I thought was weird for at the time a very young band, the 1975.
Really?
Yeah, I thought that was very weird, and I never really understood what went behind that. I'll send you some stuff later. I took some pictures. 2013, I'm pretty sure. A very small club.
Might have left right before that. I might have been out of the band at that point.
No, I remember you were there because I was like, oh, there's Greg Richling, and
Oh,
I think you had some fans there, and I think I even noticed you signed like a CD booklet for someone. I was like, oh, he must be a cool guy.
oh wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
remember the show.
yeah.
I'm usually good with that. I don't know why I don't remember the Independent. Interesting. Yeah, I don't remember that. Huh. And it was the 1975.
Yeah, and now obviously, as you know, they were huge.
Yeah. Man, I don't remember that. Jeez.
But I'm a true fan because I'm not really into the 1975 that much. So I saw you guys, and then Jack Irons had just kind of hopped in, and
Right.
I watched a couple songs of the 1975, then I took off.
Okay. Yeah. Jeez. I can't, I don't know why. What I do remember is we did the Artist End taping at 365 Bimbo's Club.
Oh yeah,
That was great. That was San Francisco. I remember playing the Great American Music Hall. I
hmm.
don't know. I remember the Independent. Huh. It's strange. Oh
Well, we can touch that. We'll edit it up a little bit, but let's see.
well. Exactly.
Well, is joining a band or rejoining the Wallflowers, is that kind of out of the picture, do you think? Or do you
For
ever
me,
see do you ever see yourself getting the itch to tour again then or no?
I don't think so. I kind of feel like I did that and I'm just on to, other things. I don't, I haven't really missed that side of things. And it's been 10 years now. I suppose, I might do something, play something for fun or, when the time comes, but I'm just so sort of immersed in this filmmaking thing now,
Yeah.
enjoying it. Yeah, I don't foresee going back to that, but never say never, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe like a fun one-off or something, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we talked about the movie. We talked about music. Who else are you like away from all this? Do you like to, travel or what's kind of your hobbies?
Gosh, outside of, making these films, I don't have a ton of time right now, but I like to read a lot. I read a lot of biographies. I read a lot of books about musicians and producers and things like that. And, listen to music. I've kind of gone back to loving vinyl again.
Mm,
The whole kind of physicality of it, holding a record, being able to read the liner notes. Yeah, I've pretty much enjoyed, kind of getting back into that.
yeah, and I guess being a dad and husband, right?
That's right. Got a lot of time put in there. I have a teenage son,
Mm.
so we pal around a lot and it's great. Yeah.
Has he shown any interest in music, or is your wife into music at all? Or
They both love music. My son played upright in the school orchestra for 3 years. He's got a great voice. He sings around the house a lot. I could see him maybe, enjoying continuing that. Yeah.
and how long have you been married?
Boy, 24 years,
Oh wow, okay.
25 years now. Yeah.
Is that hard on a marriage when you're touring? Does that ever take effect or?
I mean, I think it can be for certain people, but we kind of always handled it well. She knew who she was marrying. She knew that I was traveling a lot, and so she's very independent and does her own thing. So, we never really had an issue there. You know what I mean?
Awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty smooth sailing in that regard. I know other people have had a tougher time, and I had girlfriends before I was married that didn't handle it quite as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Greg, it's been great to have you on. I'll make sure we put out the word for the immediate family when it comes out. It was great to have you on the show and a lot of fun having one of my favorite musicians on from one of my favorite bands. So thanks for the time.
I really appreciate you having me.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for the time, and I'll see you on down the road somewhere.
I appreciate it.